Minister for Forestry, Fisheries and Environment, Creecy, has been speaking with representatives of the Associated Private Nature Reserves and community members in the Mpumalanga area this week. They've been discussing a range of issues, including the western boundary at Kruger National Park, tackling wildlife crime and enhancing transformation of the local economy. The Minister is with us now to talk about what's come out of those discussions. A very good afternoon to you, Minister Creecy. Let's begin with the western boundary of the Kruger, and located for those of us who've not been yet, and what the issues there specifically have been.
Well, we are talking about from the central to the southernmost part of the Kruger Park. I think many listeners might be familiar with the Palabora area. We have a whole range of private nature reserves that border Kruger there. And further south in the Sabi area, there are also private nature reserves. And these reserves are important to us. They form part of the greater Kruger area, which extends from Mozambique, where we have a transnational protected area, and also this part on the western boundary that includes private nature reserves. We all started working together some time ago in the Greater Kruger Environmental Protection Forum, where we were combating wildlife crime, specifically rhino poaching. But in recent times, we have been discussing the possibility of working more closely together on other issues. So we do want to continue to improve protection of wildlife, and specifically to combat rhino poaching. And we were sharing with the different nature reserves exactly what we're doing to combat wildlife crime. We've recently set up our fusion center that is doing a lot of analysis of crime, and I think that as a result of that work, we've been seeing some significant interception of rhino horn and arrests much higher up the food chain than the foot soldiers that we might have been arresting in the past. But we're also interested in looking at the much broader issues. You would understand that protected areas have the important possibility of allowing for beneficiation by communities living on the outskirts. There is a lot of land to the north of these protected areas, land that would be under the authority of traditional authorities and also community property associations. We believe that there are opportunities to use this land for compatible uses, such as extensive ranching.
Right.
We've recently, Cabinet approved the game meat strategy. So we wanted to talk with these private nature associations about how we could all work together to improve livelihoods for people on the outskirts of our national parks.
And I'll come back to the issue of what's been agreed, but on the issue of wildlife crime, we speak rightfully about rhino poaching in South Africa as a major problem, because we've all seen the horrific pictures of rhino maimed or killed by poachers, right? But I'm curious about the scope. How safe are the other species in this country from criminals?
Well, I think that what we have seen, particularly during the COVID period, where communities living on the outskirts of protected areas were suffering due to the lack of tourism and the lack of revenue from tourists, we have seen an increase of snaring of animals. We assume that this is primarily for food purposes. But of course, we're deeply worried about young men in communities bordering our national parks who get drawn into syndicates that are involved in rhino poaching. There is a horrible war going on. It leads to death of rangers. It leads to death of foot soldiers who are directly involved in poaching. And we think that the only sustainable way to deal with this problem is to be ensuring that there are better opportunities, economic opportunities for people on the outskirts of our national parks.
What then have you agreed with the independent organizations to better not just the situation for the communities, but but also the animals, which ultimately then lead to the arrival of tourists, and the arrival of those tourists allows the local communities to set up business and sell other things that tourists may be interested in.
Absolutely. So we've agreed to set up 3 working groups. The one would be around combating wildlife crime. The second would be to work on how we protect the ecosystems and the ecosystem services in these areas, and how we use our knowledge and conservation that is happening in the private areas to start partnering, as I've already explained, with other areas that are on the outskirts of our national parks, so that we can develop proper sustainable economic activities in those areas. And then the third area is what we're calling administrative systems and governance. I think everybody always complains in their relationship with government about red tape.
Mm-hmm.
We think if you understand the permissions and administrative processes that these private owners require, we can work together with them to ensure that things happen faster, and obviously that helps both with conservation and also with economic activities.
For that to work successfully, the subcommittees themselves would have to be greatly inclusive. How much attention have you paid to doing that?
Well, I think from the side of the private landowners, they are already quite well organized in this association of private nature reserves. So they obviously would be in a position to select their representatives. Of course, sandparks would need to be involved, and the currency of sandparks was in those meetings, as well as one of the board members of sandparks. And then, of course, our own department would need to come to the party, and in the meetings we had our Deputy Director General responsible for biodiversity and conservation was there. So I think that all parties were at the table, all parties understood what the needs and the problems are, and I think that that is why we were able to commit to working together in a manner that, as you correctly say, will benefit both people and nature.
Minister Barbara Creecy, good to have your time as always. Thank you.
Thank you very much.